My valedictorian son called me too stupid in his graduation speech after I gave him everything. I showed him what stupid really meant. My son Zachary was always smart. Straight A's since kindergarten, perfect SAT scores, full ride to an Ivy League school. I was a single mom working 2 jobs to keep us afloat after his dad left when he was 3. I'd stay up until 2 a.m. helping him with projects after my night shift at the hospital, where I worked as a nurse. I'd skip meals to buy him test prep books. I wore the same 3 scrubs for 5 years so he could have the right calculator, the right laptop, the right everything for school. Teachers loved him, called him gifted, exceptional, a joy to teach. Parent conferences were just them gushing about how brilliant Zachary was. I was so proud. Put every report card on the fridge, framed his honor roll certificates, told everyone who'd listen about my genius son. Things started changing junior year when he got into the advanced placement programs. Suddenly, I was too dumb to help with homework. He'd roll his eyes when I asked about his day, saying I wouldn't understand the complexities of what he was learning. When I tried to show interest in his robotics project, he said my questions were remedial and embarrassing. He started correcting my grammar in front of his friends. If I mispronounced a word, he'd stop the whole conversation to fix it. He'd explain basic concepts to me like I was 5 years old, using this slow voice like he was talking to someone with brain damage. His friends would laugh and he'd shrug like, what can you do with parents like mine? Senior year got worse. He was accepted early to Yale and suddenly, I was an embarrassment. He asked me not to come to award ceremonies because I didn't dress appropriately. My scrubs weren't professional enough. He said other parents were lawyers and doctors, and I was just a nurse who probably couldn't even get into community college. He actually said that to my face. When college kids visited our school, he introduced other kids' parents to them, but walked past me like I wasn't there. At his 18th birthday dinner, he told his girlfriend's parents that I was anti-intellectual, and he'd succeeded despite my influence, not because of it. They looked horrified, but he just kept going, saying intelligence skips generations sometimes. The guidance counselor called me in to discuss graduation, said Zachary was valedictorian and would give a speech. I cried right there in her office. My boy, who I'd raised alone, was valedictorian. She said Zachary had requested I sit in the back so I wouldn't distract him. She thought that was odd, but he'd insisted. Graduation day came. I wore the only dress I owned, the one from my sister's wedding 10 years ago. I sat in the front row anyway. Had been there since 6 a.m. to get that seat. Other parents congratulated me on raising such an accomplished son. I was bursting with pride. Then Zachary took the podium for his speech. He started talking about overcoming obstacles, about how some people are born into intellectual families that nurture growth, and others have to overcome their circumstances. He said, and I'll never forget this, that the biggest challenge of his life was being raised by someone who couldn't even help with 6th grade math. The whole auditorium went quiet. He continued, saying success sometimes means leaving behind those who hold you back, even if they're family. He looked straight at me and said, intelligence can't be taught to those who are inherently limited, and that's why he was grateful to teachers who filled the gaps left by an inadequate home life. He actually said watching me struggle with basic concepts taught him what not to become. He thanked his teachers for being the real parents he needed. He ended by saying he hoped other students with stupid parents knew they could overcome their genetics through hard work. People gasped. The principal tried to cut the mic, but Zachary finished. He said specifically, looking at me, that his mother was proof that not everyone deserves children, and sometimes the best thing you can do is succeed despite your stupid parents. He got a standing ovation from students who didn't understand what had just happened. I sat there frozen while he walked off stage. Parents around me were staring. One mom touched my shoulder in sympathy. I left during the diploma ceremony. Went home and saw Zachary's Yale enrollment papers on the kitchen table. The ones I needed to sign for his financial aid. The ones requiring my tax information to prove need. The deadline was in 3 days. I didn't sign them. Zachary came home from his graduation party at midnight, drunk on his success. Asked if I'd handled the paperwork. I said no. He laughed and said, of course not. Probably couldn't understand the forms. He said he'd walk me through it tomorrow, like teaching a toddler to read. I told him I understood perfectly, and wouldn't be signing anything. He said I had to. It was required for his aid package. I said stupid people probably shouldn't make such important decisions. He panicked. Zachary stares at me like I've lost my mind, then laughs nervously and says I'm joking because obviously I understand how important this is. I meet his eyes and tell him I understand perfectly. I'm just too stupid to make such big decisions. His smile disappears and he asks what I mean, voice rising with the first hint of real fear I've heard from him in years. I walk to my bedroom and close the door while Zachary follows, talking faster now about deadlines and requirements and how this isn't funny. Through the door, I hear him say he'll help me fill out the forms tomorrow when I'm thinking clearly. I don't respond, and eventually hear his footsteps retreat to his room. I lie awake all night replaying the graduation speech in my head, every word etched into my memory. The way he looked directly at me when he said stupid parents, and how the other parents stared at me with pity or shock. My phone buzzes repeatedly with texts from Zachary asking if I'm awake, each message more anxious than the last. Morning comes and I get ready for my hospital shift like always, moving through the apartment while Zachary sleeps off his celebration. I leave the unsigned papers exactly where they were on the kitchen table. At work, my coworker Elena notices I'm distracted and asks if everything's okay after the graduation. I break down and tell Elena everything. The years of escalating contempt, the humiliating speech, Zachary's expectation that I'll sign away my leverage like nothing happened. She listens with growing anger and says any mother would feel the same way I do. Her validation feels like the first breath of air after drowning. When I get home that evening, Zachary is pacing the apartment with the papers in his hand. He's clearly been awake for hours and starts talking immediately about how we need to handle this tonight because the deadline is tomorrow. I walk past him to the kitchen and start making dinner like he isn't speaking. Zachary follows me, voice getting louder as he demands to know what my problem is. I turn and ask him to explain what he meant in his speech about stupid parents and inadequate home life. He goes pale and stammers that it wasn't personal, just part of his narrative about overcoming obstacles. I ask him directly if he thinks I'm stupid. Zachary hesitates, then says, "That's not the point. The speech was about his journey, and I'm making it about me." I tell him his journey included 18 years of me working myself to exhaustion, so he could have everything he needed, and he responds that he never asked me to do that. The words hit like a physical blow, and I have to grip the counter to stay steady. Zachary sees my reaction, and his expression shifts between guilt and defensiveness. He says we can talk about feelings later, but right now we need to focus on the deadline, reaching for the papers again. I take the papers from his hands, walk to my bedroom, and lock them in the drawer of my nightstand. Zachary pounds on my bedroom door saying I'm being irrational and emotional, and this is exactly the kind of limited thinking he was talking about. I tell him through the door that stupid people shouldn't handle important documents. I sleep maybe 2 hours before my alarm goes off at 6 a.m. for my shift. My eyes burn when I open them, and my whole body feels heavy, like someone poured concrete into my bones during the night. I drag myself to the bathroom and splash cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror. There are dark circles under my eyes and new lines around my mouth that I swear weren't there yesterday. I look 10 years older than I did at graduation. I get dressed in my scrubs and head to the kitchen to make coffee, but I stop in the doorway because Zachary is already up, sitting at the table with his phone pressed to his ear. He's talking fast, his voice high and strained, and when he sees me, he holds up one finger like I should wait. I pour my coffee and lean against the counter, listening to him beg someone to please just check one more time if there's any way to extend the deadline. He hangs up and drops his phone on the table with a clatter, then looks at me with red eyes that might be from crying or lack of sleep or both. His hair is sticking up in all directions, and he's wearing the same clothes from yesterday, wrinkled now and smelling faintly of sweat and panic. He opens his mouth to say something, but I hold up my hand and tell him I'm going to work. We can talk later. He starts to stand, but I'm already walking toward the door, my coffee cup warm in my hand and my keys jingling in my pocket. I hear him call my name, but I don't turn around. Just keep walking until I'm in my car with the door locked and the engine running. The drive to the hospital is quiet, except for the radio playing some song I don't recognize, and I let my mind go blank and focus on the road ahead of me. When I pull into the parking lot, my phone buzzes with a text from Zachary asking where I am and if I signed the papers yet. I turn my phone off completely and shove it in my locker before my shift starts. Elena finds me in the break room during my first break and asks how I'm holding up. I tell her I don't know, which is the truth. She squeezes my hand and says she's here if I need to talk, and I nod because I can't trust my voice right now. The morning passes in a blur of patients and charts and vitals, the familiar routine keeping my hands busy even if my mind won't settle. Around 11 a.m., I'm checking on a patient in room 304 when I hear my name over the intercom asking me to come to the front desk. My stomach drops because nobody pages me to the front desk unless something is wrong. I finish with my patient and walk down the hall, my shoes squeaking on the polished floor. When I get there, the receptionist points to the waiting area, and I see my sister Mariana sitting in one of the plastic chairs, her purse clutched in her lap and her mouth set in a tight line. She stands up when she sees me, and I already know this is going to be bad. I tell the receptionist I'm taking my lunch break early and lead Mariana outside to the parking lot, where we can talk without everyone listening. She starts before we even get to my car, asking what I think I'm doing and telling me that Zachary called her at 6 a.m. this morning sobbing about how I'm ruining his life. I unlock my car and we both get in, the heat from sitting in the sun making the air thick and hard to breathe. Mariana turns to face me and says Zachary is brilliant. He has his whole future ahead of him, and I can't let hurt feelings ruin everything he's worked for. Her voice is sharp and she's using the same tone she used when we were kids, and she thought I was being stupid about something. I ask if she was at the graduation yesterday, and she pauses, then admits she wasn't, but Zachary sent her a recording, and she heard it was a beautiful speech. I pull out my phone and turn it back on, waiting while it loads and ignoring the flood of notifications that pop up. I find the video someone posted online of the full speech and hand my phone to Mariana, telling her to watch this, and then we'll talk. She takes the phone and I watch her face as the video plays. See the exact moment her expression changes from annoyed, to confused, to horrified. She hears Zachary call me stupid and inadequate, watches him thank teachers for being his real parents while standing at a podium in his cap and gown looking proud of himself. When the video ends, she sits very still for a long moment, staring at the black screen. Then she hands my phone back and asks quietly what I'm going to do. I tell her honestly that I don't know. Part of me wants to sign the papers because he's still my son, and I want him to succeed. I've spent 18 years wanting nothing but his success. But another part of me can't forget standing in that auditorium being humiliated in front of everyone I know. Can't unhear the laughter from students who thought calling your mother stupid was funny. Can't unsee the pity on other parents' faces. Mariana is quiet for a minute, then says she understands but warns me that if I don't sign, I'll be proving him right about holding him back. Her words sting like a slap, because I know that's exactly how Zachary will frame this, how he'll tell everyone that his mother was so limited, she couldn't even fill out financial aid forms correctly. I drop Mariana off at her car and go back inside to finish my shift, but I can't focus and nearly mix up medications for 2 patients before Elena catches my mistake. At 4:45 p.m., I'm checking vitals on a patient in room 212, and I watch the clock on the wall tick toward 5 p.m., each second feeling like an hour. The Yale deadline is at 5 p.m., and the papers are still locked in my nightstand drawer at home, unsigned. My phone starts buzzing at 4:58 p.m. and doesn't stop, call after call from Zachary that I silence without looking at. At exactly 5 p.m., I watch the second hand sweep past 12, and something in my chest tightens and releases at the same time. Elena comes to find me at 5:15 p.m. and squeezes my shoulder without saying anything, and I realize everyone at the hospital knows what just happened. I finish my shift in a daze, and Elena walks me to my car, asking if I'm okay to drive. I nod and get in, sitting in the parking lot for 10 minutes before I can make myself turn the key. The drive home feels longer than usual, and I take the long way, going past the park where I used to take Zachary when he was little. When I finally pull into my apartment complex, I see all the lights are on in our unit and my stomach twists. I walk up the stairs slowly and unlock the door, stepping inside to find Zachary pacing the living room with his phone in his hand. His eyes are red and swollen and his face is blotchy, and when he sees me, he starts talking immediately. He says, "I've ruined everything." He can't believe I actually let the deadline pass. What was I thinking? He's been on the phone with Yale all afternoon, and they're saying without the financial aid paperwork, his enrollment is in jeopardy. They need the information to process his aid package, and without it, he might lose his spot entirely. His voice cracks, and he's talking so fast I can barely understand him, words tumbling over each other in his panic. I set my bag down and take off my shoes, moving slowly and deliberately while he follows me around the apartment still talking. I turn to face him and ask if he called them stupid too, or just me. He stops mid-sentence and stares at me like I've slapped him, his mouth hanging open. Then he starts crying. Really crying. Not the angry, frustrated tears from this morning, but deep sobs that shake his whole body. He sinks down onto the couch and puts his face in his hands, and I stand there watching him, feeling nothing and everything at the same time. He says he's sorry between sobs. He didn't mean it the way it sounded. I have to understand the pressure he was under to give a meaningful speech. He says everyone expects so much from him, and he was trying to tell a compelling story, and it came out wrong. I sit down in the chair across from him and tell him he had 4 years to show me respect. 4 years of opportunities to treat me like a person instead of an embarrassment, and instead he chose to humiliate me publicly at his graduation, when he thought he didn't need me anymore. Now he needs me again, and suddenly he's sorry. Suddenly it was all a misunderstanding. Zachary looks up at me with his face wet and his eyes desperate, and asks what he's supposed to do now. I tell him I don't know, and I mean it because I truly don't have an answer. I ask if Zachary knows she's here. Una shakes her head and her eyes fill up with tears. She says they broke up yesterday after she told him the speech was cruel and wrong. She couldn't stay with someone who treats his mother that way, especially when that mother gave up everything for him. Her voice cracks when she says it, and I can see she really cared about him. She says she kept hoping he'd realize how wrong it was, but he just got defensive and said I was making him choose between his future and his past. She wipes her eyes and tells me she's sorry she didn't speak up sooner. After she leaves, I close the door and lean against it. My chest feels tight, and suddenly I'm crying. Really crying for the first time since graduation. Not from pain exactly, but from this weird relief flooding through me. Someone else saw what happened and thought it was wrong. I'm not crazy for being hurt. I'm not overreacting or being too sensitive like Zachary keeps saying. The validation from someone his own age, someone who loved him, makes something loosen inside me that's been wound tight for days. The next 3 days pass in cold silence. Zachary stays in his room mostly, and when he does come out, he won't look at me. He leaves notes around the apartment instead of talking. I find one on the kitchen counter that says I'm sabotaging his future out of spite. Another shows up on the bathroom mirror saying I'll regret this when he's successful without my help. There's one taped to the fridge about how he should have known I'd find a way to hold him back. I leave them all exactly where they are. This paper trail of his anger and resentment. Each note makes the situation clearer in my mind. He's not sorry about the speech. He's just mad that there are consequences. My phone rings on Thursday morning before my shift. The caller ID says the high school and I almost don't answer. But I pick up and hear Greg Marr, the guidance counselor, asking if I have time to meet with him. His voice sounds concerned and careful. I tell him I can stop by after work, and he says that works fine. All day at the hospital, I wonder what he wants. Maybe Zachary complained about me. Maybe the school needs something signed. When I get to his office that evening, he's waiting with the door open. He gestures to a chair and I sit down. My scrubs, still smelling like antiseptic. Greg says he's been troubled by Zachary's speech and wanted to check in with me. He asks how I'm doing, and the question is so genuine that I almost start crying again. I tell him honestly that I've been better. He nods and says several teachers complained to the principal after the ceremony. Parents, too. I'm not the only one who found it wrong and hurtful. Greg leans forward and his face is serious. He tells me something I didn't know. Zachary's speech was supposed to be reviewed by the principal beforehand. Every valedictorian speech gets approved to make sure it's appropriate. But Zachary submitted a different version for review. The speech he actually gave at graduation was not what he showed the administration. Greg says the principal is upset because Zachary deliberately deceived them. This information hits me like cold water. The humiliation wasn't just thoughtless or a mistake made in the moment, it was planned. Zachary wrote those words knowing exactly what they meant, got a safe version approved, then switched it out to say what he really wanted. He looked at me in that audience and chose to hurt me on purpose. Something shifts inside me hearing this. I thought maybe he just got carried away or didn't think it through. But he thought it through completely. He planned every word. My phone rings 2 days later while I'm folding laundry. The number has a Connecticut area code, and I answer carefully. A man's voice introduces himself as Hiroshi Kato from the financial aid office. He says he's trying to understand Zachary's situation because the case is unusual. Most families miss deadlines because of confusion or lack of information, not because the parent refuses to sign. His tone isn't judgmental, just curious. I take a breath and tell him the truth. My son publicly humiliated me in his graduation speech, called me stupid and inadequate in front of hundreds of people, then came home and expected me to sign paperwork like nothing happened. There's silence on the other end. Hiroshi asks me to explain what happened at graduation. So I do. I tell him about the speech, about Zachary thanking teachers for being his real parents, about him saying I was proof some people shouldn't have children. Hiroshi listens without interrupting. When I finish, Hiroshi is quiet for a long moment. Then he asks if I'm refusing to provide the information permanently, or if this is a temporary situation. The question stops me cold because I realize I don't actually know the answer. I've been reacting day by day, just trying to get through each morning and night. I haven't thought about what happens next week or next month. I tell him honestly that I need time to figure out what comes next. He says he understands and that Yale can extend the deadline by 2 weeks if that helps. He'll send the paperwork to my email. I thank him, and we hang up. 2 more weeks. The extension changes everything, because suddenly this isn't about a missed deadline anymore. It's about an active choice I have to make. Zachary must be listening from his room, because within minutes he emerges. His face looks hopeful for the first time in days. He asks if that was the financial aid office. I nod and tell him about the extension. Relief floods his expression, and he starts to smile. He says we can handle the paperwork this weekend then. I look at him standing there assuming everything is fine now, and I tell him the extension doesn't mean I've decided anything. His smile disappears. He asks what I mean, and I say exactly what I said. I have 2 more weeks to think about whether I'm going to sign or not. He stares at me like I'm speaking another language. The next morning, I'm heading to my car for work when my neighbor Kira stops me in the hallway. She's holding a bag of groceries, and she sets it down. She says she was at the graduation. Her daughter is in Zachary's class. She tells me what he did was wrong, and she's been thinking about it ever since. Kira says her own son is entitled and disrespectful sometimes, and she wonders if she failed him by not setting stronger boundaries when he was younger. Now he's 20 and treats her like she's there to serve him. Her words hit close to home. She asks if I'm okay, and I tell her I'm working on it. Kira squeezes my arm and says whatever I decide about the paperwork, she thinks I have every right to take my time. After she walks away, I sit in my car for a few minutes. This is about more than just the financial aid forms. It's about what I teach Zachary about how you treat people, about consequences, about respect. That evening, I knock on Zachary's door. He opens it looking wary. I tell him we need to have a real conversation, not him talking at me, but both of us actually listening to each other. He hesitates, then nods. We sit down at the kitchen table, the same table where we used to do homework together when he was little. I remember helping him with spelling words and times tables, back when he still thought I knew things worth knowing. I ask him when exactly I became someone he was ashamed of. The question hangs in the air between us. Zachary doesn't answer right away. He looks down at his hands and his jaw works like he's trying to figure out what to say. Finally, he admits it started when he got into advanced classes and realized how different our lives were from his classmates' families. Their parents could help with calculus homework and discuss philosophy and take them to museums in other cities. I couldn't do any of that. His voice gets defensive when he says it, like he's explaining something obvious. I let him finish, and then I ask if he ever considered that I was working night shifts to pay for his opportunities, that while his friends' parents were discussing Kant, I was emptying bedpans and checking IVs so he could afford the test prep books and application fees that got him into those advanced classes in the first place. He looks up from his hands and his voice gets sharper, more defensive. I know you worked hard, but that doesn't change the fact that you don't understand my world. The words land like a slap, but I force myself to stay calm and ask what he means by his world. Zachary gestures vaguely like the answer should be obvious. The academic world, the intellectual discussions, the kind of thinking that happens at places like Yale. I remind him that I helped him get to that world even if I'm not part of it. that every night shift and skipped meal was, so he could have access to things I never had. His jaw tightens and he looks away. Sometimes help isn't enough. Sometimes you need actual intellectual partnership, not just someone who pays the bills. The honesty in his voice makes it worse somehow. Like he's thought this through and decided I really am just a checkbook with no value beyond that. I sit there absorbing the devastation of hearing my son say that my sacrifices weren't enough, that I wasn't enough, and I realize this is the core of everything that happened at graduation. He doesn't just think I'm stupid. He thinks I'm fundamentally inadequate as a partner in his life. The silence stretches between us until I can't take it anymore. I tell him I'll consider signing the papers, but I need something from him first. Relief floods his face so fast it's almost funny, like he thinks this nightmare is finally over. He agrees immediately to anything, already reaching for the papers on the table. I hold up my hand to stop him. I need him to understand why the speech hurt me, not just apologize to make this go away, but actually comprehend what he did. His relief falters, and he starts to say something about already apologizing, but I cut him off. Real understanding. Not just words to get what he wants. He nods slowly, the hope in his eyes mixed with uncertainty now. I pull out my phone and find the video someone posted of his graduation speech. Zachary's face goes pale when he realizes what I'm doing, but I'm already moving to the couch, patting the cushion beside me. He sits down reluctantly, his body angled away like he might bolt. I hit play, and we watch together. The opening is fine, typical valedictorian stuff about dreams and futures, but then it shifts. I watch Zachary squirm as his recorded voice talks about being raised by someone who couldn't help with 6th grade math. He tries to speak to explain away the cruel line, but I stop him with a look. Just watch. His face gets redder as the speech continues, as he hears himself thank teachers for being his real parents, as he watches himself look directly at me in the audience and call me stupid. When it ends, I ask him how he would feel if I gave a speech calling him inadequate and embarrassing in front of everyone he knows. He opens his mouth, closes it, then stares at the blank phone screen. The question hangs there unanswered. Zachary is quiet for so long, I wonder if he's going to respond at all. Finally, he says he sees how it sounds, but his voice is defensive again. His intent wasn't to hurt me. It was to tell his story of overcoming obstacles. I feel something snap inside me, and I ask him point blank if he considers me an obstacle he had to overcome. The question catches him off guard, and he hesitates, his mouth working like he's trying to find the right words. That hesitation tells me everything I need to know. The pause is just long enough that I have my answer before he even speaks. My son thinks I'm something to overcome, not someone who helped him succeed. I stand up from the couch and walk to the kitchen, needing space before I say something I can't take back. 2 days later, there's a knock on the door. Brady Poole stands there looking uncomfortable, hands shoved in his pockets. He asks if he can talk to me privately, and I let him in, curious what Zachary's best friend wants. Brady sits on the edge of the couch and says Zachary is a mess, that everyone in their friend group is worried about him. I ask if Brady was at the graduation, and he nods, his eyes dropping to the floor. The speech made everyone uncomfortable, but nobody knew what to say afterward. He admits they all just kind of pretended it was normal, even though it clearly wasn't. I appreciate the honesty, even if it stings knowing that a whole group of teenagers recognized how wrong it was but said nothing. Brady starts talking faster, like he's been holding this in for a while. He tells me that Zachary has always talked about me with a mix of gratitude and frustration. Grateful for what I provided, but frustrated by what he saw as my limitations. The frustration got worse senior year when Zachary were accepted to Yale and started imagining his new life there. Brady thinks Zachary was trying to distance himself from his background in the speech, not specifically attack me. Like, if he could establish himself as separate from his working-class roots, then he'd fit in better at Yale. I listen to Brady explain Zachary's mindset, and I understand what he's saying on an intellectual level, but it doesn't make the hurt less real. Understanding why someone stabbed you doesn't make the wound heal faster. I thank Brady for his honesty and tell him exactly that. That understanding Zachary's mindset doesn't erase what he did to me in front of everyone I know. Brady nods and says he gets it, his shoulders relaxing a little now that he's said his piece. Then he adds that Zachary is his friend. But what he did was wrong, and Brady wanted me to know that not everyone thinks I deserved that treatment. After Brady leaves, I feel slightly better knowing that the people who know Zachary best recognize he crossed a line. At least I'm not imagining things, or being too sensitive like Zachary implied. Elena calls the next evening and invites me to dinner at her house. I accept immediately, grateful for the distraction and the chance to get out of the apartment where every room reminds me of the tension with Zachary. Her place is small but cozy, and she's made pasta with homemade sauce that fills the kitchen with garlic and basil. Over wine, she tells me about her own daughter, who moved to California 5 years ago and rarely calls. Elena says sometimes our kids hurt us in ways they don't fully understand until they have children of their own, until they're the ones lying awake, worrying and sacrificing and getting their hearts broken. She talks about how her daughter used to complain that Elena was too involved, too worried, too much. And now Elena just gets occasional texts and a phone call on holidays. The pain in her voice is familiar. Elena refills my wine glass and asks what I'm going to do about the papers. I admit I'm leaning toward signing them because despite everything, I still want Zachary to have opportunities. The words feel like a confession, like I'm admitting weakness. Elena doesn't judge, though. She says that's my choice to make, but warns me to make sure Zachary understands there are consequences for how he treats people, even if I give him what he needs. She reminds me that signing the papers doesn't mean everything is fine, that I can still require things from him like respect and accountability. Her words give me something I've been missing, permission to both help my son and demand better from him. I return home around 10 to find the apartment transformed. Zachary has cleaned everything. Not just surface cleaning, but actual deep cleaning, like scrubbing the baseboards and organizing the kitchen cabinets. There's a pot of spaghetti on the stove, simple but clearly made with effort. He appears from his room when he hears me come in and says he's been thinking about what I said. He wants to try to explain himself better, to really talk instead of just defending himself. I look at the clean apartment and the dinner he made, and I see someone trying. Maybe not succeeding yet, but actually trying. I sit down at the kitchen table and tell him I'm willing to hear him out. He pulls out the chair across from me and takes a breath. And for the first time since graduation, he looks like my son again, instead of a stranger wearing his face. Zachary shifts in his chair and rubs his face with both hands. He starts explaining how college applications work these days, how everyone writes essays about overcoming something difficult. He says admissions offices want to see resilience and growth, not just perfect grades. When he was drafting the speech, he kept thinking about what would make him stand out, what story would show he'd faced real challenges. He admits he built this narrative about rising above an intellectually limited home environment because it fit the template of what selective schools want to hear. His voice gets quieter as he talks, and he won't quite meet my eyes. He says somewhere in writing and rewriting the speech, polishing it for maximum impact, he stopped thinking about me as his actual mother sitting in the audience. I became just a character in his story, a plot device to demonstrate his perseverance. It's not exactly an apology, but it's the first time he's acknowledged that what he did was calculated, rather than just thoughtless. I can see him struggling to reconcile the person who loves me with the person who used me as a stepping stone in his college narrative. I ask him directly if he actually believes I'm stupid, or if calling me that was just part of the story he wanted to tell. Zachary freezes, and his mouth opens, but no words come out at first. He looks down at his hands, and I watch him trying to figure out how to answer. Finally, he says he thinks I'm limited by not having gone to college myself, that there are things I don't understand because I wasn't exposed to them. He's careful with his words now, weighing each one. But then he adds that being uneducated isn't the same as being unintelligent, that he knows I'm capable of learning things if I had the opportunity. I tell him that distinction might matter in his head, but the words he used in front of 300 people were crystal clear. He called me stupid and inadequate and said I was proof some people don't deserve children. Those weren't nuanced observations about educational access. They were deliberate insults designed to make himself look better by making me look worse. Zachary's face crumples and he starts crying again, saying he knows what he said was wrong. But I notice he still hasn't actually said he doesn't think those things, just that he shouldn't have said them out loud. The conversation dies and we sit there in heavy silence. Zachary keeps wiping his eyes with his sleeve, and I stare at the kitchen table where we used to do homework together. He says quietly that he doesn't know how to fix what he broke. I tell him honestly that I don't know either. The hurt is too big and too public for a simple apology to cover. But I also tell him that this, right now, is different from how he's been treating me. He's actually talking to me like I'm a person whose feelings matter instead of dismissing everything I say as too stupid to consider. That's not forgiveness, but it's something. We sit without speaking for probably 10 minutes and the silence feels strange. The gap between us is somehow smaller because we're being honest, but also more permanent because we both know our relationship will never be what it was. I can't unknow that my son sees me as an obstacle he overcame. He can't unsay the words that everyone we know heard him speak. The next morning I call Yale's financial aid office and ask for Hiroshi. When he answers, I explain that I'm Zachary's mother, and I need to understand what happens if I sign the enrollment papers now. Hiroshi's voice is professional, but kind as he walks me through the timeline. He says Zachary's financial aid package is still being held for him, and his spot in the incoming class hasn't been given away. If I submit all the required paperwork before the extended deadline he set up, everything can proceed normally. Zachary will start in the fall exactly as planned. I ask if there's any way to add conditions to the financial aid forms themselves, requirements he'd have to meet to keep receiving support. Hiroshi pauses and then explains that the paperwork doesn't work that way. The forms are standard federal documents that just verify financial need. But he adds that what happens between family members is separate from what Yale requires. If I want to set conditions for my personal support or involvement, that's between me and my son. The university just needs the tax information and signatures to process his aid. His words give me an idea. I find Zachary in his room staring at his phone. I tell him I'll sign the papers, but only under certain conditions that he has to agree to first. His head snaps up and relief floods his face. I lay out what I need from him. He has to attend family therapy sessions with me over the summer, every week until he leaves for school. He has to write a real apology letter that specifically acknowledges what he did wrong and why it was hurtful, not just a generic sorry for any offense caused. And he has to maintain regular contact during his first year at college, actual conversations where he treats me with respect, not just occasional texts when he needs something. Zachary agrees immediately. nodding and saying yes to everything before I even finish explaining. He's so quick to accept that I wonder if he's actually hearing me or just saying whatever he thinks I want to hear, so I'll sign. I tell him I'm serious about these conditions, and if he breaks them, I'll stop providing any support beyond what Yale legally requires. He swears he understands and he'll do whatever it takes. My phone rings that evening, and it's Mariana. She asks how things are going, and I tell her about the conditions I set for signing the papers. There's a pause, and then she says she's proud of me for standing my ground while still supporting Zachary's future. Her voice sounds different from our last conversation, less judgmental. She admits she was too quick to push me to just sign everything and move on. After watching the video of the speech herself, she understands now why I couldn't just pretend nothing happened. She says she's sorry for not listening better before, for making it sound like I was being petty when really I was processing a massive betrayal. Hearing her acknowledge that she was wrong helps more than I expected. I tell her I'm still scared I'm making a mistake, that maybe I'm being manipulated into signing because Zachary knows exactly what to say now. Mariana says that's possible, but at least I'm protecting myself with clear boundaries instead of just giving in completely. I spend the next day researching family therapists in our area. I need someone who specializes in parent and adult-child relationships. Someone who won't just try to smooth everything over. When I find a woman whose website talks about repairing damaged family bonds and setting healthy boundaries, I call and schedule our first appointment for the following week. That evening, I tell Zachary we have therapy next Thursday at 4. He looks up from his laptop and asks if this is really necessary or if I'm just punishing him. The question makes me angry because it shows he still doesn't get it. I explain as calmly as I can that if we're going to have any relationship going forward, we need professional help rebuilding it. What we've been doing clearly isn't working. He destroyed my trust and humiliated me publicly. I enabled his contempt by not setting boundaries sooner. We need someone objective to help us figure out how to be in each other's lives without one of us getting hurt. Zachary nods slowly and says, okay, he'll go. The first therapy session feels awkward from the moment we sit down. The therapist's office is small, with 2 chairs facing a couch, where Zachary and I sit as far apart as possible. She introduces herself and explains how the sessions will work, then asks us each to describe our relationship. I go first and talk about the sacrifices I made, working 2 jobs and skipping meals so Zachary could have everything he needed for school. I talk about how proud I was of his success, and how devastating it was to hear him call me stupid in front of everyone. My voice cracks when I describe sitting in that auditorium while parents stared at me with pity. When it's Zachary's turn, he tells a completely different story. He talks about feeling pressured by my expectations, like his success was more about validating my sacrifices than about his own goals. He says he was embarrassed by our class difference, that his friends' parents were professionals who could discuss ideas with them while I worked night shifts, and couldn't help with homework past elementary school. He admits the speech was cruel, but says it came from years of feeling like he had to hide where he came from. Hearing him say these things with the therapist as a witness is both validating and heartbreaking. At least I'm not imagining that he looked down on me, but knowing it was years in the making, not just a one-time mistake, makes it so much worse. Over the next several weeks, we go to therapy every Thursday. The sessions are exhausting and painful as we dig into years of resentment and misunderstanding. The therapist helps us see that we've been living in completely different realities. I saw myself as a devoted mother who gave up everything for my son's success. Zachary saw himself as carrying the burden of being exceptional in a family that didn't understand him, feeling isolated and ashamed. She points out that neither perspective is completely wrong, but both are incomplete. I did sacrifice tremendously, but I also made Zachary feel like his achievements were about proving my worth as a mother. He did work incredibly hard, but he also took for granted the foundation I provided, and looked down on me for not being able to keep up with his intellectual growth. The work of reconciling these 2 truths is slow and uncomfortable. Some sessions end with both of us in tears. Others end with tense silence. But gradually, we start to actually hear each other instead of just defending our own positions. Between therapy sessions, Zachary works on his apology letter. He shows me several drafts, and I send him back to revise, because the first few are still too focused on explaining his motivations, rather than acknowledging the harm. Finally, he produces something that's better than I expected. He lists specific things he said in the speech and names why each one was wrong. He acknowledges the public humiliation and recognizes that my sacrifices made his success possible. He writes about how he let his own insecurity about class differences turn into contempt for the person who loved him most. The letter doesn't fully capture the depth of the hurt, because I don't think he can truly understand what it felt like to be me in that moment. But he's trying, and the effort shows. I read it 3 times and then tell him I accept his apology. I also tell him that accepting it doesn't erase what happened. The words he spoke are still out there. The damage to our relationship is still real. But this letter is a start. I sign the papers 3 days before the deadline, sitting at our kitchen table with the pen feeling heavy in my hand. Each signature takes longer than it should. Zachary watches from the doorway, not coming closer, not saying anything. When I finish the last form, I slide the stack across the table toward him. He picks them up carefully, like they might disappear if he moves too fast. His shoulders drop, and for a second he looks like he might cry, but he just nods and says he'll scan everything tonight. I call Hiroshi the next morning to confirm he received the documents. He tells me Zachary's enrollment is secure and his aid package is finalized. The words should feel like relief, but instead they sit in my chest like a weight. I thanked him for the extension and he pauses before saying he hopes things work out for our family. After I hang up, I stare at my empty hands and wonder what exactly I just signed away. Our last therapy session happens on a Thursday afternoon. The therapist asks where we are now, what we've learned, how we see our relationship going forward. I tell her we're in a place of cautious hope. The hurt is still there, living under my skin where I can feel it every time I think about the graduation. But love is there too, stubborn and refusing to leave despite everything. Maybe that's enough to build on. Zachary shifts in his chair and says he agrees, then adds that he's starting to understand what I gave up for him. He can't fully grasp it yet, not really, but he's trying. The therapist nods and says that awareness is the first step. She reminds us that rebuilding takes time and patience, that we'll have setbacks, that this isn't a straight line to healing. When we leave, Zachary holds the door open for me, and we walk to the car in silence that feels less heavy than before. The weeks before he leaves pass in a strange rhythm. We talk more than we have in years, but there's a formality to everything, like we're acquaintances instead of mother and son. He asks about my shift at work and actually listens to my answer. I ask about his packing and help him label boxes without him rolling his eyes. We're building something new instead of trying to fix what broke. One morning, I find him in the kitchen making breakfast, and he set out a plate for me without being asked. Small things like that happen more often now. We eat together and discuss his class schedule and whether he needs extra blankets for the dorm. The conversations are practical and careful. Neither of us mentions the speech anymore. It sits between us like furniture we've learned to navigate around. Yuna texts me asking if we can meet for coffee. I'm surprised but agree, curious what she wants to say. We meet at the cafe near campus, and she looks different somehow, more serious than I remember. She tells me right away that she's glad I worked things out with Zachary, even though she and he are still broken up. I thank her, and she stirs her coffee for a long moment. She says watching our situation made her think about how she treats her own parents. They work in a factory, and sometimes she feels embarrassed about it around her college friends. But seeing what happened between me and Zachary scared her. She's been making more effort to show appreciation, calling them more often, thanking them for things she used to take for granted. I reach across the table and squeeze her hand, telling her that awareness matters. When we part ways, she hugs me tight and whispers that I'm a good mom. The words crack something open in my chest. Ralph catches me in the break room at work and says I seem lighter somehow, less burdened. I stop pouring my coffee and realize he's right. Standing up for myself, even though it was terrifying and painful, lifted something I'd been carrying for years. The need to constantly prove my worth to my own son is gone. It's been replaced by a clearer understanding of my value that doesn't depend on his approval. I worked 2 jobs and sacrificed everything and got him to Yale. That's not nothing. That's not stupid or inadequate. Ralph smiles and says he's proud of me, which makes my eyes sting. He squeezes my shoulder and heads back to his rounds. I finish my coffee and feel something close to peace. The day comes to drive Zachary to the school. We load the car in the early morning, boxes and bags filling every available space. The drive takes 6 hours, and we fill the time with practical conversations about dorm life and class schedules and where to buy groceries. He shows me the campus map on his phone and points out buildings where his classes will be. I ask questions about his roommate and meal plans and laundry facilities. Underneath all the practical talk is the awareness that our relationship has fundamentally changed. We're not going back to what we were before, to the easy closeness of his childhood, or even the painful distance of his senior year. This is something new, still taking shape, and that's both sad and necessary. Neither of us says this out loud, but I can feel it in the careful way we navigate the conversation. Yale's campus is beautiful, all old stone buildings and green lawns. We find Zachary's dorm and start hauling boxes up 3 flights of stairs. His roommate's parents are already there, a lawyer and a professor who introduce themselves with firm handshakes and easy confidence. I feel the old insecurity rising, the sense that I don't belong in spaces like this. But then I remember that I got my son here through night shifts and sacrifice, through skipped meals and worn scrubs and years of exhaustion. That's worth just as much as their law degrees and academic credentials. I hold my head up and help Zachary arrange his desk, making small talk with the other parents about move-in day logistics. When the lawyer asks what I do, I tell her I'm a nurse and my voice doesn't shake. Saying goodbye happens in the parking lot after we've finished unpacking. Zachary walks me to my car and we stand there awkwardly, not sure how to end this. He steps forward and hugs me tight, tighter than he has in years. He whispers that he's sorry again, and I believe he means it, even if he doesn't fully understand yet what he's sorry for. I tell him I love him and I'm proud of him, and I mean it despite everything. We're both trying, and maybe that's what matters. When I get in the car, he stands there watching until I pull away. I see him in the rearview mirror, getting smaller, and my chest aches with love and loss and hope all mixed together. Driving home alone, I cry, but it's different from the tears after graduation. These aren't tears of humiliation or betrayal. These are tears of release. I've set a boundary, demanded respect, and still made space for my son's future. I didn't have to choose between loving him and valuing myself. The road blurs, and I pull over at a rest stop to collect myself. I sit in the car and let the tears come until they stop on their own. When I start driving again, I feel lighter. Back home, the apartment feels empty, but peaceful. I walk through rooms that suddenly seem bigger without Zachary's presence filling them. His bedroom door is open, and I can see the bare walls where his posters used to hang. My phone rings, and it's Elena, checking in like she promised. I tell her everything about the therapy, the conditions, the goodbye at the school. She listens without interrupting, and when I finish, she says I handled an impossible situation with grace and strength, and I should be proud of myself. I tell her I am, and realize I mean it. After we hang up, I make myself dinner and eat it slowly, alone, but not lonely. The first time my phone rang after dropping Zachary off at Yale, I almost didn't answer. His name lit up the screen and my stomach twisted, expecting another crisis or demand. Instead, his voice came through quiet and careful, asking how the drive home went and whether I'd eaten dinner. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing important, just small things like his roommate's habit of playing music too early and my shift schedule that week. It felt strange, this version of conversation where neither of us was performing or defending. He called again 3 days later, then twice the following week. Each time we talked a little longer, found a little more ground where we could meet without old resentments flaring up. He told me about his economics professor, who reminded him of his high school teacher, and I told him about a patient who brought the whole nursing staff homemade cookies. We were building something new from scratch, piece by piece, and it was messy, but it was real. November arrived cold and gray, and Zachary texted saying he was bringing someone home for Thanksgiving. I panicked at first, imagining another girlfriend's parents to impress, or a Yale friend who'd judge our small apartment. Instead, he showed up with Joseph, a kid from rural Pennsylvania whose dad worked construction. Joseph looked around our place with the same relief I'd seen on Zachary's face after therapy, like he'd found proof he wasn't the only one. Over turkey that I'd stressed about for days, they talked about feeling lost in dining halls where everyone seemed to know which fork to use, about classmates who spent spring break in Europe while they worked campus jobs. Zachary admitted he'd lied about our apartment for months, telling people we lived somewhere nicer. Joseph nodded, said he'd done the same thing about his family's trailer. Watching them compare notes on hiding where they came from, I realized my son was finally understanding what I'd tried to tell him. Shame doesn't just hurt the people you're ashamed of. It cuts you off from your own story, leaves you floating without roots. The night before Zachary went back to the school, he found me washing dishes and asked if we could watch something together. I assumed he meant a movie, but he pulled up the video of his graduation speech on his laptop. My hands went still in the soapy water, and I asked if he was sure. He nodded and set it up on the coffee table, then sat beside me while we watched him call me stupid in front of everyone who mattered to us. This time, he didn't try to explain it away or defend his word choices. When it ended, he sat quiet for a long moment, then said he'd been cruel because he was terrified of not belonging at Yale. He thought if he could prove he'd overcome his background, he'd earn his place there. Instead, he said, he'd just hurt the person who got him there and made himself smaller in the process. He was learning that his background wasn't something to escape, but something that made him stronger, gave him perspective other students didn't have. I didn't forgive everything in that moment, but I believed he was finally starting to understand. Standing in the driveway the next morning, watching Zachary load his bag into Joseph's car for the ride back to campus, I felt something shift in my chest. We'd never have the relationship I'd imagined when he was small, back when I thought love and sacrifice would be enough. The hurt from that speech would always be there, a scar we'd both carry. But we were building something honest now, something that didn't require either of us to be different from we were. He was learning to respect the life that raised him. I was learning that boundaries didn't mean the end of love. As the car pulled away and he waved through the window, I thought about that auditorium 6 months ago, how completely broken everything had felt. We weren't fixed, probably never would be completely, but we were both growing, both trying, both showing up for the hard work of being family. That was more than I'd let myself hope for back then, and somehow, it was enough.